I have been teaching myself how to make stained glass, and this was my second ever piece, my first using the copper foil method, and I thought it would be fun to kind of document my progress. Since this was only my first project, I didn't film properly or take enough footage, but this is all a learning process, so bear with me. This video will probably sound like a lot of negative comments or everything to fix rather than what I did correctly, but I want to say that I am so proud of this project. It is absolutely horrific and I love it because I finished it and it's something I never thought I would be able to do. I struggled with the tools during this project. At the time, I just thought maybe it was because I was too new to this. It takes a lot of time to get used to everything, but I would later discover that I was not only using some of the wrong tools, but I wasn't using the ones I had correctly. As you can see, the grousers, which I hope I'm saying correctly, those were upside down, and I actually didn't even realize that for a few more projects, and it was all thanks to a comment on the internet. I just thought they were difficult to use or were more for shattering the glass versus breaking it. I had originally taken a class at a local community club, and it was very casual. I'm so thankful for it because I immediately fell in love with the art of making stained glass, but it was the very first class that the teacher was hosting, and it was a learning process for everyone. I have absolutely no experience when it comes to making stained glass or what it actually entails. I walked into the class completely oblivious, although I will admit that I watched quite a few videos of soldering before that day. So everything that I did was just lightly guided, and most of what I learned has been at home. The class that I took was also a lead came version where I had been doing the copper foil method at home, as you'll see. So the foundation is pretty much the same for both methods when it comes to actually cutting the glass, and precision is key. In the HCAM version, which is the one I took my class on, you need larger gaps between each pieces. There's special scissors that you'll need to use to cut your pattern for that gap. I was told that there's also special scissors for the copper method because you don't want the pieces to be like extremely tight. You still need that little bit of space between them, but not as big as the lead version. But as far as the actual glass cutting and grinding goes, it's the same process. I'm sure that if someone ever watches this that knows what they're doing when it comes to making stained glass, they are cringing at my foil technique or how absolutely off my pieces are. But I'm telling you, this is probably my favorite project to date because it was my first ever copper foil sun catcher style that I've ever made. If there is one thing that I would tell someone who's interested in making stained glass but intimidated by it, it would be just do it. I would definitely try taking a local class to see if it's something that you're even into because it's quite expensive to get started. But if you find that you love it, just go for it. Everyone is terrible when they start, but you'll improve and you'll learn, and it's just such an incredible experience. Okay, back to the actual process. So even when it came to pinning the pieces together, it makes me laugh watching this back. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing it and learning as I went. Nothing lined up. The black glass was a nightmare to work with because the pen that I used to trace my pattern on wasn't oil-based. So as soon as I took it to the grinder, that marker rubbed right off, and you obviously can't see through the black glass to see where your pattern is, so it was just a complete disaster. Another really big thing that I learned during this process was to pay attention to how you mark your pattern on the glass. I didn't even think about it when I was putting my pieces on. All I paid attention to was making sure that I traced my pieces on the flat side of the glass. I didn't think about how I needed to reverse my piece so that it would match the rest of my pattern, so the ears on the final piece of this are actually backwards, but I still love it. Currently, if I'm working on something that isn't like a square shape to sort of pin it into place easily, I'll actually use painter's tape instead. It's been working a lot better so far, fingers crossed. It hasn't torn the copper or pulled anything up. When it came to soldering, this really was my first time soldering something on this big of a scale. The very first project I did was using HCAM, so the only places you had to solder were those hinge points, which I think that's what they're called, basically just the corners of where that came met. I would also like to note that I spent a good $70 or $80 on my soldering iron. I thought I was getting the correct one that everybody recommends, but after a little bit more time with it, I discovered that I should have bought a different iron, which is actually within the same price point, so it's been a little bit disappointing. But I do want to at least get my money's worth out of this one, so I haven't upgraded quite yet, but I know that when I do, my soldering will get even better, and I'm so excited about that. Even with the wrong soldering iron, I was never going to do that great on this project, to be perfectly honest. All those videos that you've watched that seem so aesthetically pleasing are nothing like what you're going to experience when you begin doing this. I mean, I'm sure that it would help if my iron was that Hakko, I think is the one that everybody recommends for stained glass, but even without that, you still have to get an idea of how to work with the solder. It's sort of like whenever you hear people say, you just know, and you just get frustrated thinking, what does that even mean? What do you mean I'll just know? But you'll just know and you'll finally understand what that means when it all clicks. I actually did a little bit better soldering this project than I did my next one. I ended up taking a step backwards with my next project because I thought maybe if I made this thin layer of solder it would look better, which I've since learned is actually called tinning, but I was very, very wrong. During this project, I began to learn why making sure your copper foil is cleaned up was so important. I can hear things a million times, but until I experience it and I see it for myself, I don't fully understand it. You will see every crack in your copper or overlapping piece of copper foil. Take the time to clean up those edges, and if you need to refoil a piece, take the time to do it, even if it feels tedious to do so. You will be paying for it later. While I was soldering, I really did think that I liked the way that this looked, which probably because I didn't know any better or any different. I loved when the line would smooth itself out and learning how to handle the solder a little bit better. In reality, I needed to add more solder. You should have more of that beveled look to it. It's not just for the look either. If you leave it more of that flat tin version, it's going to be a more vulnerable piece. Adding that extra solder makes for better reinforcements to help kind of keep that piece together. When it came to soldering the edges, I honestly don't even remember how I got through it. At that point, I didn't know about UCAME, which is how I would normally be outlining my pieces at the stage that I'm currently at. So I just sort of went around the edges and tinned it, or in some spots, it's a little bit more beveled. Because I had taken that class at the community club, and it was such a new class and a new experience, the amount of time that we had in the class had gone over, so the teacher actually prepped a couple of things for us without us being there. Lead came and copper foil are finished differently, so it wouldn't have really mattered if I was doing it, but even when it came to the patina, I had no idea what to prep for. So as you're watching me awkwardly just pour the copper patina onto my piece, know that I have learned so much since this. But at the time, I was just kind of going for it. I loved the way the copper foil looked, and I thought copper patina would turn out the same way, but I was so very wrong on that too. I'll eventually try the copper patina again and prep it properly, which includes washing that flux off completely, and even when you think it's off, wash it again. Give it a slight rub down with a magic eraser, wash it again, let it completely dry. I've seen some comments saying that they use a toothbrush to sort of rough up that solder to help with the copper vibrancy, but I've not tried that yet or seen a ton about it, but that's also supposed to help when it comes to copper. But for this project specifically, none of that happened, and you will see at the end how terrible my decisions were. I was just excited to be able to do this and went into it completely blindly. Thankfully, the internet has been very kind to my stained glass journey in sharing their tips and their encouragement. I would also like to note that I don't just pour my patina onto my piece anymore. I started using Q-tips, but you go through a lot of those, so I've upgraded to using a brush instead. I mean, there is no denying that it looks not the greatest. Some spots look rusted out. Some of it you can see that copper foil coming through. The shapes clearly were not cut to match the pattern exactly. My grinding was not great. Nothing about this piece is something that you would proudly display for anyone who is making stained glass, but I will say I am proudly displaying this piece in my window because I learned so much through this process. And for those who might be feeling discouraged or wondering how long it takes to kind of get everything to just click, I think it is always going to be a learning process and you're always improving. But here is a photo of my most recent pieces to kind of give you a little bit of hope. The cow was my first, and the last two were my sixth and seventh projects. The growth is mind-blowing to me, and I am so excited to see where this journey is headed, and thank you for being on it with me.